The slaughter floor at Scone Abattoir was idle today. With no inspectors to pass the meat, there was no work, and 85 staff members were sent home. From January, abattoirs were told to pay the government $65,000 per year per inspector. That's about $33,000 above the average inspector's wage.
We're being ripped off by the government because of excessive overheads.
According to Darryl Brain from Scone Abattoir, it's a classic case of public service blundering. Half of the inspection fees being wasted on bureaucracy. And that's a burden the industry simply cannot afford to carry.
There was a company recently went bankrupt in Victoria owing $300,000 for inspection fees.
The flow-on for the meat producers could be catastrophic. In the middle of a record drought, farmers are selling their cattle in droves. But if the abattoirs stay closed, cattle markets will lose a major bidder.
It's going to mean that the sales possibly of fat cattle would have to be put off, I'd imagine.
40% of meat in Hunter butcher shops comes from the local abattoirs. If the dispute continues, butchers will have to bring in supplies from interstate. The New South Wales Abattoirs Association says the problem can be easily solved with self-regulation. That is, companies privately hiring their own inspectors and not wasting exorbitant amounts of money on added bureaucratic expenses. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
This is the incident that has earned David Boyd 3 weeks on the sideline and forced coach Alan McMahon to change a Knights lineup that has yet to taste defeat in the 1991 Premiership.
A bit of a telling blow, but hopefully in Glenn Miller we've got a pretty able substitute.
Miller will add pace to a pack that struggled to make breaks last week, while the return of Mark Sargent will hopefully tighten up the defence in and around the rucks.
I think it was more or less on the edges they found the holes, and one through the middle, of course. But, hopefully we'll plug them up.
Sargent's return has forced David Woods onto the fresh reserves bench. He'll be joined there by speedy winger Adrian Brunker. The rest of the side remains unchanged. Meet the new kid on the blocks. Simon McKillop-Davies made the final of the 200 metres butterfly at both the Commonwealth Games and the World Championships. And now he's decided to call Newcastle home.
I've been having financial troubles in Sydney. Sick of living by myself. Mum and Dad moved up here about 12 months ago, so I thought the obvious solution for my whole problem was to come down here, train and live with my parents.
His decision to join the BHP Hunter swim team has been hailed as a godsend by coach Eric Arnold.
The requirements of the federal government are that we have 2 world-ranked swimmers by Barcelona, and with Donna and Simon here, we're now right on target.
Simon has his sights set firmly on Barcelona, but training partner Donna Proctor isn't looking quite so far into the future. Next week she'll compete in the Pan-Pacific Trials and intends contesting the 400 metres individual medley and the 2, 4 and 800 metres freestyle.
I've been training okay and I'm fit enough, so I've only got to swim each day, so that'll be okay.
Arnold believes Donna has never looked better and says she'll return from the trials as the country's top female distance swimmer.
The row erupted during question time in state parliament yesterday when the opposition raised the allegation that the 31-year-old mother had been told if she wanted the man who allegedly assaulted her little girl brought to justice, she'd have to pay for it. The woman said the ultimatum came from a detective at Newcastle's Child Mistreatment Unit and followed almost 2 years of investigations. Opposition Police Minister Peter Anderson was quick to criticise.
And I think things have reached a pretty sorry state in New South Wales when access to justice is dependent upon your capacity to pay.
But in a statement late yesterday, Mr Pickering strenuously denied the allegation, saying there was a warrant out for the man's arrest and if located, he'd be extradited at police expense, as is usual in such matters. He said it appeared the woman had been confused. But late this morning, the woman at the centre of the controversy said she'd received no word from police to reassure her of this. In fact, she said she'd been kept in the dark in the entire investigation, with no word from the detective involved in days and little indication of how close he was to making an arrest. However, a spokesman for Mr Pickering was well informed, saying that Queensland police had been called in and were confident of locating the man shortly. Once that was done, he said the New South Wales police would fly to Queensland at the department's expense and bring the man to Newcastle. The row between council and residents centres around this new railway overpass bridge being built at the eastern entrance to the town. Council wants to divert traffic away from the main business district and into the residential thoroughfare of Ravenshaw Street. According to Shire President Barry Ryan, it was the most cost-effective option and the only one the Roads and Traffic Authority would fund.
If we had a choice of taking other options, but putting a tremendous burden of something like $500,000 on the ratepayers of Gloucester.
So basically this was a financial decision?
It's a financial decision to get the best possible route financed by the Road Traffic Authority.
Councillor Rodney Redman, though, is not satisfied with the decision. He believes the main road should remain through the centre of the business district.
I believe that we could have the return into Queen Street at exactly the same amount of money as it costs to go back into Ravenshaw Street.
The route of the new main road has been an issue in Gloucester for the last 2 years. Most recently, though, concern has centred around this street. Residents believe heavy traffic will be diverted past the primary school, the preschool and the local church.
This street here, which has the school in it, will be the first main access that people will be able to use to get to the shopping centres.
I've got young children going to school. I don't like it going through the way it's going to go. I reckon there's nothing wrong the way it is.
Despite those resident concerns, Council stands by its decision. The $1.1 million overpass bridge and road should be complete by July. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
When Bolton and Marmong Point residents took on the coal industry in 1988, they knew they were up against the odds, but didn't realise exactly who they were fighting. Now they claim to have evidence of a collaboration between the coal industry and senior public servants from several government departments.
Well, it indicates that there was a conspiracy against our community organisation, the local residents and the Progress Association, which involved high government officials in government departments in the mining industry in collaborative meetings set out to combat, to undermine, to overwhelm a small community group that was simply trying to save the environment and save their homes.
They say the minutes taken from the meetings prove they were never given a fair chance to express their fears and stop the onset of longwall mining. They're demanding an investigation.
We've sent a letter to the Premier asking him whether he considers it fair play. We'd like to know what the Premier thinks about this.
And what about ICAC, a chance it will go there?
Yes. I think the Independent Commission Against Corruption ought to take action in this case.
The Premier's department has forwarded the material to Minerals and Energy Minister Neil Pickard, who will now look into it.
They're being worn in all the best places, from the yacht clubs of Sydney Harbour to the bowls and golf clubs from Cairns to Kakadu. Bob and Carol Cruikshank started designing and manufacturing their hats 3 years ago with the help of the Hunter Region Enterprise Agency. Working from home, they've turned out 60,000 items. They're a small business with a practical secret to success.
Teamwork, we both work really well together.
And it's a unique product.
Yes, it is a unique product.
Their hats are made from a laminated CFC-free foam rubber and nylon material. Wherever possible, they deal with local suppliers and subcontract some of their work to the House with No Steps at Valentine. Bob and Carol turn out about 200 of their distinctive and unique designs per day from a garage workshop. Their latest project is the Super Hat, a combination of the Legionnaire's cap and a wide brim. While it may look different, it's beginning to get the nod of approval.
While the collapse of the region's shipbuilder as well as printing firm Davies and Cannington has led people to believe Newcastle is feeling the brunt of the recession, official figures show otherwise. We are in fact weathering the hard times better than most.
I think the Hunter Region's economy is performing particularly well. The reason for this is that some of our sectors are performing very strongly.
According to economist Andrew Searle of the Hunter Valley Research Foundation, a 30% increase in coal exports and a boost in tourism have buoyed the local economy.
During a recession, people have less money to spend on a holiday, and Sydney, which forms our main market for tourists, people from there see that it's more economical to travel to the Hunter region rather than making more distant trips.
Traditionally, Newcastle's unemployment rate has been above the state average. The latest figure stands at 8.7%, 0.1% higher than the New South Wales average. But it is an improvement, and according to Mr Searles, a reliable indicator of the region's strength.
If we look at the level of employment growth, the Hunter region has recorded a growth rate that's exceeded New South Wales for at least the last 12 months. It's not just a short-term effect. The the growth of employment has outstripped New South Wales over the last 12 months, and that's been very consistent.
Bob Carr chose a Chamber of Commerce luncheon to launch his policy for the Hunter region. As well as decentralisation, Mr Carr believes the region's roads are of primary concern. If elected, he has promised to inject $1 billion into roadworks.
We can deliver a $1 billion 5-year roads program for the Hunter region by continuing the 3 cents a litre petrol levy.
Mr Carr also says Labor would oppose the sale of 9 Elcom mines and restore 200 teaching positions to the Hunter, as well as cutting class sizes. Mr Carr acknowledges that the region has been let down in the past by the federal and state governments, but says every promise he makes, he can keep.
And Mr Griner's the one who's broken 200 election promises. I mean, they were matters on which he promised to deliver for the Hunter and simply didn't.
When questioned about the pollution issue in Newcastle, Mr Carr damned the State Pollution Control Commission, saying an environmental protection authority established by his government would wield more clout.
An environmental protection authority with real power to fine the BHPs and to fine government agencies that don't deliver on the clean environment.
Though the cutbacks are not being officially announced by BHP until Monday, this afternoon unions heard the grim news. According to the Federated Ironworkers Union, the 5,300 employees of Newcastle's Rod and Bar division are to be dramatically pruned to around 4,000. Although it is to be a gradual reduction through all departments, the Steelworks foundry is to be shut down by this time next year. According to the unions, the foundry needs a $10 million upgrade, which is unviable since its products can be bought from overseas more cheaply than can be produced here. Tonight, BHP refused to comment on the across-the-board cutbacks, but confirmed that 165 people would be affected by the foundry closure. Though jobs will be protected under the Steel Industry Development Agreement, voluntary retirement will be offered.
There are several surprising ideas in the theory of Professor Ron Laurer.
In the largest control study to date on melanoma, which has just recently come to light, it's been shown that if you compare blue and white collar workers who are indoors for most of the year in their jobs and compare that group to outdoor workers, people, laborers and other people who are outdoors most of the time, it turns out that the rate of skin cancer is actually greater for the indoor group than it is for the outdoor group.
Professor Laurer believes that and other studies illustrate a pattern of skin cancer that can be traced not to our exposure to the sun, but to our lack of exposure.
What we're arguing is that sunlight is of crucial importance to the maintenance of health and also healthy skin. And what one ought to be doing is looking towards more regular and cumulative exposures to natural light than we are at present.
He also believes that artificial light, like that in our offices and homes, can actually be harmful.
By virtue of being in the artificial light context, certain of the messages which are passed on through the light to the human body trigger mechanisms which are very different from the mechanisms that are normally triggered through natural sunlight.
Professor Laurer also makes some very worrying observations about the creams and lotions we slather on each summer to avoid burning.
They give you the false security of thinking that you're not burning, therefore you're okay. But in fact, when you're out into the sun for prolonged periods, ultraviolet A radiation, which is a longer wavelength of light, actually permeates the dermis at a much deeper level than does ultraviolet B.
Conventional theories acknowledge that some exposure to the sun can be beneficial, but Professor Burton of the Hunter Area Health Service does not agree with claims that artificial light is harmful to the skin and contributes to skin disorders.
Well, if that was so, we'd expect that there would be the same kind of rate of skin cancer in Tasmania as in northern Queensland, where presumably the office workers have the same exposure to fluorescent light. It's quite the opposite. The risk of melanoma is 3 times higher in northern Queensland than it is in Tasmania, and the same for skin cancers.
The Rosellas were on their game right from the outset, and their first try came from a switch in play by hooker Paul Bowen, whose pass found in-form halfback Tony Price backing up, and his step and pace was too much for the struggling Bulldogs' defence, and Price was in to score. And it was the live wire half who began the chain movement which resulted in another try. Brett Hode made the bust and found winger Tim Morrison in support on his right, and the Western Suburbs Rosellas had the match in their keeping.
The week-long program of events covers all aspects of beef production, from farm bookkeeping to breeding, and the general public isn't forgotten either. After the judging of the various breeds of cattle on the hoof, they and other exhibits are paraded through Wingham in a well-patronised example of the bush comes to town. Then for some beasts, the inevitable, slaughter at the local abattoirs, after which the carcasses are hung in the chiller for 24 hours before further judging. Various prizes are awarded. The lightweight trophy went to Barry Bishton of Warhope with Brangus cattle. Medium weight was won by the Scrivener family from Yarrowitch near Walker with Brahman Hereford Cross, and the heavyweight prize went to the Higgins family from Gloucester. The champion light local trade carcass was won by Eric Richardson of Wingham, with the champion supermarket carcass going to Frank and David Upwood from Glendonbrook near Singleton. An all-breeds bulls competition went to a Santa Gertrudis exhibited by the Galen stud at Munkarai near Stroud. Also featured during the week were field days and seminars, including the launching of the total catchment management plan for the Manning to stem increasing sedimentation of the river.
Concern in Newcastle about industrial pollution has reached a level where it can no longer be ignored. Residents claim the body set up to control pollution is a toothless tiger, allowing industries virtual free rein. But Environment Minister Tim Moore guarantees this will change in July, when the Environmental Protection Authority is established in place of the State Pollution Control Commission.
The formation of the Environment Protection Authority from the 1st of July is committing an extra $15 million and 150 new staff for environmental protection, and that will mean an upgrading of the pollution officers and the pollution staff here in Newcastle.
But Mayfield residents who met with the Minister this morning aren't so sure things will be different.
I didn't think that we got anything much out of it at all, really, other than the Minister said that there will be a name change.
The EPA won't just be a name change for the State Pollution Control Commission. If it is, I've failed.
Mr Moore also today promised action against BHP for the Easter Monday gas leak.
The areas that are being investigated at the present time, as I understand it, as to whether the company was negligent or not. That goes to what level of prosecution is likely to take place rather than whether a prosecution will take place at all.
The final decision on whether to prosecute BHP will be made within 10 days. Also today, the State Pollution Control Commission called for stack readouts from the Eastern Nitrogen plant at Kooragang. The SPCC and NBN were inundated with calls this afternoon about this brown plume. According to Ray Smith of the SPCC, the substance was nitrogen oxide, which is emitted about 6 times a year when the plant undergoes a routine start-up. Today's emission, however, was heavier than usual, and the SPCC will examine stack readouts to determine whether the plant breached its emission levels. This morning, employees of Newcastle's Rod and Bar division were told their numbers would have to drop from around 5,300 to a streamlined 4,000, in line with cutbacks at other BHP steelworks.
We do have a very critical situation in the Rod and Bar division, the BHP Steel, and it reflects a broader critical situation through the steel group as a whole.
According to General Manager Paul Jeans, that critical situation is a 23% drop in domestic sales on last year. Though exports increased by 40%, the return on BHP investments is way below expectations. First to go in the efficiency drive will be the foundry, together with its 165 workers. But thanks to the Steel Industry Development Agreement, there will be no retrenchments.
We're certainly confident that the reductions we need to make can be accommodated within the natural attrition losses that we incur in Rod and Bar. That runs at between 35 and 40 employees a month.
But the unions are not quite so confident.
You're now getting the economic position outside, which people were able to take a job before. I hope they can find a job. I think they'll find it more difficult, and they have acknowledged this by increasing the VER offer also that they have made to make it a bit more attractive.
So how much now is the voluntary redundancy package?
Well, they've added another 10 weeks' pay to the current package.
The jobs will go over the next couple of years. BHP aims by then to be more cost-effective and internationally competitive.
Yellow ribbons lined the streets outside 19-year-old Terry Olsen's Toronto home.
Seeing my parents, it was great. Walking up, giving them all a cuddle. It was a great feeling. It's just unexplainable.
Terry's best mate Robbie Brady recently returned from duty on the supply ship Success. They shared their experiences over a beer.
He probably had a little bit harder than me because I was on a replenishment ship. They were easier.
Terry is a naval engineer with the Brisbane. It was closer to the action when war started.
When it first started, I'd just come off watch at midnight and I had 6 hours off, so I thought, well, I better get some sleep in, so I went to my bed, and then I was laying there with my Walkman on listening to some music. Next thing you know, the action alarm was sounded, and when the action alarm was sounded, we knew there and then that it had actually started.
Terry's parents were dockside in Sydney this morning to meet him. And what's it like to have him home?
Oh, tremendous. I just want to hug him.
These two men will be among the youngest returned servicemen to march on Anzac Day. Jane Anderson, NBN News.